The Texas sun was a merciless hammer on the cracked earth of Henry's ranch. 2 years of drought had painted the world in shades of dust and despair. It was a slow, granular death. His cattle were skeletal. His well was a muddy hole, and his spirit felt as parched as the land. He was mending a fence he knew was pointless. If the last few cows didn't wander, they'd just die here anyway. When he saw the movement at the tree line, not the flicker of a vulture, but the slow, pained stagger of something still fighting to live. It was a woman and a child. Comanche, he realized as they drew nearer, their clothes little more than tattered, hides clinging to bony frames, their faces hollowed by hunger into stark relief. The woman moved with a terrible, deliberate dignity, one hand clutching the shoulder of a girl who couldn't have been more than 5 or 6. The child's steps were unsteady, her eyes too large and dark in her gaunt face, like a trapped animal's. Henry's hand instinctively dropped to the Colt at his hip. Old fears and older hatreds, bred from a lifetime of border raids and grim stories told by firelight, flared hot and quick. His thumb found the hammer. He'd lost a cousin to a raiding party a decade back. The memory was a cold stone in his gut. But as they stopped 20 paces from him, the woman gently pushing the child behind her skirts, he saw no threat, no hidden weapons. He saw only utter exhaustion, a kind that went beyond the body and into the soul. The woman met his gaze, and in her dark eyes was a calculation that had nothing to do with war, and everything to do with last chances. She spoke in halting, accented English, her voice a dry rustle. "You are the chief of this place?" "I'm the rancher," Henry said, his own voice rough from disuse and dust. She nodded once, accepting the title. Then, with a gravity that chilled him more than any war cry, she stepped forward, leaving the child standing alone. She raised her hands, palms out, to show she held nothing. Her eyes never left his, holding a challenge and a surrender all at once. "My daughter is called Little Bird. She has not eaten in 3 suns. The water's gone. The people are gone. There is only the hunger." She took another step, her movements stiff, each one a conscious effort. "I have nothing to trade. No horse, no blanket." She stopped, close enough now that he could see the fine tremors in her limbs. The dust ground into the lines of her neck. She drew herself up, a final, devastating pride in her bearing. "I offer myself. You take me. Do what you will. You give her food. You let her live in your shadow. This is the trade." Her words hung in the blistering air. She began to unfasten the thin leather tie at the shoulder of her dress, her fingers clumsy with weakness and intent. This was not seduction. It was a transaction of last resort, a piece of her soul bartered for a piece of bread, her autonomy for a child's survival. The little girl, understanding enough, let out a thin, reedy whimper that cut through the stillness. Henry felt the world tilt, the raw, brutal calculus of her offer, her body for her child's life stripped away, all the abstract politics and old grievances of the frontier. This was no longer about Comanche or Texan, warrior or settler. It was about a mother and the precipice, the most fundamental equation of all. The old hatreds curdled in his gut, shamed by this naked desperation. He saw his own barren fields, his own dwindling stores in the root cellar. And then he looked at the little girl's sunken cheeks, the way her collarbone jutted against her skin like a fledgling's wing. His finger eased off the hammer. The Colt felt suddenly heavy, useless, a relic from a different world. "Stop." The word came out sharper than he intended, echoing in the vast, dry silence. The woman's hands froze on the leather tie. Her eyes, which had held a grim, resigned emptiness, flickered with a sudden, wild fear. She thought he was refusing the trade entirely, condemning them both. Henry took a deep breath, the hot, dry air burning his lungs. He deliberately lifted his hand from his gun and raised it, palm out, in a mirror of her own earlier gesture of peace. He looked past her, to the child, trying to soften his weathered face into something less threatening. It had been so long since he'd tried. "What's her name again?" he asked, his tone shifting, forcing a calm he didn't feel into his voice. The woman blinked, confused by this non sequitur. Little Bird." "All right, Little Bird," Henry said, slowly kneeling down to bring himself to the child's eye level, though he kept a safe, non-threatening distance. "You like stew? Got a pot going inside. Got some beans in it. Ain't much meat left, but it's hot. Got a bit of salt." The little girl just stared, pressing her face deeper into her mother's leg. The woman, called Willow, watched him with the intensity of a hawk, trying to decipher this new, baffling tactic. Was this a cruelty, a taunt before the end? Henry stood back up, his knees popping. He pointed to the run-down porch of his cabin, where a narrow band of shade was just beginning to creep. "Sit there. In the shade. Don't come inside. I'll bring it out." The rules were important, for his safety and for theirs. An open door was an invitation he couldn't yet give. He turned and walked to his door, the back of his neck prickling. He half expected a knife in his back, half expected them to vanish like mirages, fever dreams conjured by heat and loneliness. They didn't. When he glanced back from the doorway, the woman had guided the girl to the porch steps, and was sitting beside her, an arm around her thin shoulders, both of them watching his every move like condemned prisoners watching a jailer, wary of a last-minute pardon. Inside, Henry's heart hammered against his ribs. He was a fool. This could be a trick, a distraction while others circled. But the child's whimper echoed in his head, a sound more haunting than any war cry. He lifted the lid on the iron pot, simmering at the back of the stove. A meager stew of beans, a few precious scraps of jerky, and some wild onions he'd scavenged. It was his food for 2 days. Without a second thought, he filled 2 of his chip bowls to the brim, then took 2 spoons, and a single tin cup of water from his precious store. He carried it out, setting it carefully on the porch plank beside them, then retreated several steps, giving them space. The smell of the food, even this simple fare, made the little girl moan softly, a primal sound. Called Willow looked from the steaming bowls to Henry, her suspicion a living thing. She picked up one bowl, sniffed it cautiously, then took a tiny, testing taste herself. She waited a moment, her body tense, then, convinced it was not poisoned, handed it to her daughter with a soft, guttural word. The sight that followed would be etched in Henry's memory forever. Little Bird did not eat, she devoured, her small hands clutching the bowl as if it might be taken, spoon scraping in a frantic, animal urgency. Called Willow did not touch the other bowl. She watched her daughter eat, and the rigid pride on her face melted into an agony of love and relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. Only when the child had slowed, the desperate edge gone from her movements, did the woman pick up her own bowl. She ate slowly, methodically, savoring each bean, her eyes never leaving Henry, still guarding, still assessing the man who had not taken what she offered, but had given anyway. When they were finished, the bowls licked clean, a fragile, saturated silence settled. The little girl's eyelids were already drooping, the weight of food and exhaustion pulling her under. Called Willow set the bowls aside neatly, aligning the spoons. The transaction in her mind was still pending. He had fed them, a bewildering act of charity, but he had not accepted her terms. She stood up, her movements light, shaky now, a cord of strength, returning with the nourishment. She faced him. The unspoken question hung in the air. What now? What is the price? Henry rubbed his jaw, the stubble coarse under his fingers. He looked away from her piercing gaze, out toward the bleached expanse of his failing land. "There's an old line shack," he said, nodding toward the western edge of his property where a stand of stubborn live oaks clung to a dry creek bed. "Half a mile. Roof's patchy, but it's got walls. There's a seep nearby, still has a trickle. It's not much, but it's out of the sun. Cooler." She stared at him, utterly lost. "You do not take me?" The confusion in her voice was genuine. Her world had clear rules. A gift demanded a gift, an act demanded payment. This imbalance made no sense. "No, ma'am," Henry said, the formality feeling strange on his tongue. "I don't." "Why?" "The food," it was the tray. She gestured to the empty bowls, the evidence of the contract as she understood it. "The food was just food," he said, the words coming slowly as he understood them himself. He met her eyes. "I've been eating alone for too long. Was poor company." He looked at the sleeping child, her head now cradled in her mother's lap. A man gets tired of his own shadow, gets to wondering what he's even holding on to all this for. He swept a hand at the dying ranch. He saw the storm of emotions cross her face: disbelief, lingering fear that this was a deeper, more subtle trick, and then a dawning, hesitant comprehension that this might be something else entirely. She was a woman who understood debt and violence, not and asked for mercy. Mercy was a luxury her life had rarely afforded. "I will work," she said fiercely, her pride reasserting itself, seeking to balance the scales. "For the food, I can clean, I can tan hides, I can mend." She gestured to his frayed shirt cuff, her eye for detail sharp even in her extremity. Henry considered. To send them away now was a death sentence. To let them stay was a risk, a complication he didn't need, a potential conflict with any neighbor or patrol. But the thought of returning to the profound silence of the cabin, with only the ghost of that starving child's face in his mind, was worse than any risk. The loneliness had become a tangible thing, another occupant in his house. "The shack needs mending," he said finally, grasping her offer like a lifeline. "The roof where it sags. You can start there. I'll bring food at sundown. You stay out of sight if anyone comes. That's the work, keeping yourselves alive and out of trouble. That's the pay." Called Willow stood tall, squaring her shoulders. For the first time, the terrifying emptiness in her eyes was replaced by a sharp, focused light. He had not taken what she offered. Instead, he had given her back her personhood, her agency framed as a job. It was a gift she could accept, without breaking, a way to receive charity while maintaining her dignity. It was the first true kindness he'd shown. She bent, and with surprising gentleness, lifted her sleeping daughter. The little girl's head lolled against her neck, a belly full of stew. For the first time in weeks, a profound trust in her slumber. "The shack is west?" she asked. "All business now." "Follow the broken fence line," Henry said. "You'll see the creek bed. Shacks in the trees." She nodded once, a chief acknowledging a treaty, a worker understanding a task. Then she turned and walked, not with the stagger of a supplicant, but with the steady, purposeful pace of someone with a direction, however temporary. Henry watched them go until they were small figures against the immense landscape, the two empty bowls sitting like artifacts on his porch. The ranch was still dying, the sky was still a brass bowl empty of rain, but the crushing weight of solitude had for the first time in years lifted just a little. He had fed them, and in doing so, he had unknowingly begun to feed something starved and brittle within himself. The debt, he realized, might not be hers at all.